We are back and streaming live this October 8th, 2009, Thursday. I am Jason Burmis. This is the Info Warrior. We are now joined by author and relative genius, Webster Tarpley. We haven't had him on in quite some time, and I wanted to get his take on the financial revelations that are out there over the past couple of months. Admitted 9.8% unemployment rate. This is the headline over at the Telegraph today. Britain overtakes U.S. as top financial center. Well, of course they have. Their pound is worth more. The euro is worth more compared to the SDR, or special drawing rights unit, the true global currency that is being used today. Now you can type in SDR conversion rates into Google, and it'll bring you to a plethora of websites providing you with the information. How are you today, Webster?
Fine, Jason. How are you?
Excellent, excellent.
I'm just back from Iceland, and I'd like to say a few words about what's going on in Iceland, because I think from this, Americans can learn from a small country how you fight, because they're fighting the International Monetary Fund that you've just been talking about. They're fighting the European Central Bank, the European Commission in Brussels, and the issue is the British and the Dutch. This goes back about a year, right after the fall of Lehman Brothers. The Icelanders had three banks that were functioning as hot money operations. They were essentially deregulated, wild finance derivatives banks, and they opened some branches in Great Britain and the Netherlands. And when the bottom fell out just a little over a year ago, there was a panic run on these banks, which was not surprising because there had been a panic run on Lehman Brothers and an AIG. There was a panic run on the money markets here in Wall Street. But at the height of the crisis, Gordon Brown, who of course is Mr. Derivatives, he's the great deregulator. Even though he's from the Labor Party, he's actually an extreme monetarist, sort of Friedmanite or Austrian school kind of guy. He had totally deregulated the British banking system. So you could open up these branches, and the British didn't look into it. But at the height of the crisis, he decided that he would seize the Icelandic banks in Great Britain, and he would just take them away, and then he would then reimburse all the depositors at a very high rate, higher than they ever would have had any reason to expect. And then he turned around and demanded all the money from Iceland. And the Dutch, in this Anglo-Dutch system, right, the sort of Royal Dutch Shell combine, Balkenende, who's a reactionary himself, a right-winger, free marketeer, he demanded the same thing from Iceland. So at the beginning of it, Gordon Brown was demanding 20 billion pounds from Iceland, and they've toned that down a little bit. But Iceland, if you look at the map, it's right at the top of the North Atlantic. It's just below the Arctic Circle, and it has a population of about 330,000 people. So it's 1/1000th of the U.S. It would take 1,000 Icelands to make the population of the U.S. Their gross domestic product is about $12 billion. So here come the British and the Dutch, and they say, guess what? We're sending you a bill really based on nothing. They based on no commitment, no signature, no regulations or anything of the kind, just a pure active force, a diktat by Gordon Brown and this Balkenende. We want at least $6 billion from you, and probably more. And in the meantime, while you're paying it, we want at least 5.5% interest. So this is simply insane. What that would lead to is, of course, depopulation. A lot of the younger people in Iceland would leave. Their existing social safety net, which is quite capable, would be completely dismantled. Their health system would be dismantled, which is also, I think, quite a good one. And they would lose their main trump card in the world, which is the fact that they have a very highly trained, educated, scientifically competent workforce, and they would basically collapse. And this money can simply never be repaid. It's a physical impossibility.
Well, on the other side of this break,
talking about debt moratorium.
Well, on the other side of this break, I want you to tell the listeners how the Icelandic people are fighting back, because it really is a microcosm of what's going on globally. Back after this, it's the InfoWarrior with Jason Burmis, PrisonPlanet.tv, Infowars.com.
I didn't agree.
We are back. It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Burmis. We're joined by Webster Tarpley, and we were just discussing the situation in Iceland and how the people are trying to fight back. Please continue, Webster.
Well, you have therefore the British and the Dutch with the backing of the International Monetary Fund. Very, very interesting. There's no particular reason why the International Monetary Fund, at least formally, technically, would be picking sides. But, of course, they are a creature of the British and of the City of London and Wall Street, and the Dutch are closely related. So they're demanding, really, it's a sum of money that hasn't really been defined, but the general figure seems to be $6 billion, half the gross domestic product of Iceland, 5.5% interest rates at minimum, and that's simply physically impossible. You'll never pay it, no matter what you do. And you can destroy the country by trying to pay it, and eventually you won't pay it. So you have the choice between an orderly debt moratorium, a debt stop, a debt freeze declared now, which just says, look, for the next 15 years, 20 years, we won't pay anything. We're willing to talk to you, but not with threats. And that's your one choice. The other choice is you try to pay, ruin the country, and eventually end up at a default. And if you look at Germany in the 1920s under the reparations, you can see that the attempt to pay destroys society, and it sets the stage for some kind of fascism or authoritarianism. Hard to imagine in Iceland today, but certainly possible. So I had a friend there who was a veteran of the 9/11 truth movement in Iceland, Þórarinn Einarsson, and he invited me to come. I had written a paper about Iceland recommending a debt moratorium, recommending that they go all the way to a debt moratorium. Don't stop at some halfway deal which says, well, we'll give you 6% of our future growth in gross domestic product or something like that. That's a failure. That was tried by Alan Garcia in Peru back in 1985 to 1990, and it didn't work. It creates hyperinflation, and it led then to the dictatorship of Fujimori for other reasons too, but did lead to dictatorship. The reason you get hyperinflation in Peru or in Germany in the 20s or in Iceland today is if you're constantly having to sell your own currency, the Icelandic crown, to get dollars or euros to pay these banks, it means you're going to drive your currency down, 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 and ultimately when the international value of a currency collapses, then the internal value, the purchasing power also collapses. So the big news then is as of Monday night, there was a special meeting of the Icelandic parliament, the Althing, which happens to be the oldest parliament in the world by most counts. And there was a call raised for a debt moratorium. And I think this is the first time this was actually put out, so directly and courageously. And it comes from a woman. Her name is Birgitta Jónsdóttir. And Birgitta Jónsdóttir is the leader of a small parliamentary group called The Movement. Now, what this came from was that in November, December, January, there was a political mass strike in Iceland. In the wake of this banking crisis, there were demonstrations at the Parliament Square in Reykjavik and other places, at least every week, very well attended, thousands and thousands of people in a small country. And that brought down the existing right-wing government. The right-wing government was the so-called Independence Party. They were the ones who deregulated everything. They brought in wild capitalism, the free market for the banks, derivatives, offshore financing, and all the rest. And that's what set the stage for this crisis. With normal regulation, it could never have occurred. But it did occur, and therefore they were made to pay the price. So there was an election in January in which the right-wing government fell, and unfortunately a social democratic government, dominated government, came in, and the Social Democrats are determined to join the European Union, even though the European Union takes the side of the British and the Dutch. So the idea is join Europe, and in order to get in, you've got to pay $6 billion over a period of several years. So Birgitta Jónsdóttir said, look, this country, Iceland, is technically bankrupt. We should stop paying. The IMF and the European Union have been hostile to us. They've been supporting the British and the French in their extortion, because that's really what it is. And this it got a significant amount of attention in the Icelandic press. we're now in the middle of what is likely to become a government crisis in Iceland because the health minister, a guy that I was also able to talk to, he's from the Left Green Party, and he said, look, I can't go out in public and recommend that we pay. I simply can't, in good conscience, tell my fellow citizens that they should pay the British and the Dutch. And one of the rules for being a minister in the cabinet is you've got to obey the discipline of at least in public, you've got to support the agreed-on policy. So he quit the government about 10 days ago